Yeah, I am really thankful to Mahavet as well as Vetrina for giving me this opportunity to interact with my past students, colleagues, and professional friends. I think what I'm going to talk today is on common poisonings in ruminants. Uh, and I have chosen because the subject is very wide and it's very difficult to uh, cover within 40 minutes or 45 minutes. So I have chosen three important and most prevalent poisonings in ruminants, and we'll discuss about that. Uh, and what I have tried to do today is bring you updates because you're all graduates and postgraduates, so you know the basic things. So I'll not go into details of basics, but I'll mostly try to tell you what is the new thinking in diagnosis and treatment of all these problems. Uh, so my lecture plan is to give you some idea about nitrate poisoning, oxalate poisoning, hydrocyanic acid poisoning, uh, and if time permits, I'll give a brief about accidental lead poisoning. But since these are accidental and only isolated cases, so let's see whether there is a time. Always a question to differentiate between what is poison and what is toxin. Well, poison is a substance that has got a noxious effect on living organism, whereas a toxin is a poison which is produced by the organism. So that is the basic difference between the two. Uh, that means all the toxins will also be poisonous, but all poisons may not be toxins. So let's start with nitrate poisoning. Nitrate is an important ingredient of all the plant material, and nitrate is actually a metabolite which is acquired from soil nitrogen, and then soil nitrogen is converted into ammonia, and ammonia is converted into plant protein. So that is how is the nitrogen cycle. But what happens sometimes, the conversion of nitrate to nitrite happens, but then from nitrate to ammonia does not happen, and therefore nitrate starts getting accumulated. And when it is consumed in large amount, then there is a problem in case of ruminants. Now the source of nitrate could be both feed and water, but for us veterinarians, as far as ruminants are concerned, I think feed is a major source of nitrate poisoning. In chronic cases, there is a sublethal dosage, which will happen over a long period of time. Whereas in acute cases, there is immediate consumption of large quantities of nitrate-containing forage, which results in formation of methemoglobin, and this methemoglobin is not having good oxygen carrying capacity. So there are respiratory signs and dyspnea. Now, normally sheep and cattle are more susceptible than goat. Now, as far as most of these poisonings are concerned, you must remember that rumen microflora is able to take care of a lot of these alkaloids, glycosides, which may be toxic in nature. So depending upon what is the type of toxic material coming from fodder, a particular microflora in the rumen would start getting multiplied. Say for example, if I'm talking about nitrate, and if nitrate is to be converted into non-toxic material in rumen, then the concerned bacteria would start multiplying. So you have a large amount of that bacteria present, and it takes care. So therefore, in ruminants, if you start giving small doses of these toxic materials like nitrates, then the ruminants become accustomed to it. They are able to take care of this material again up to some extent, and after that threshold is gone, then you would have the signs. That is number one situation. And number two situation is where there is sudden consumption of large amount of nitrate, so you don't have the right kind of microflora to take care of detoxification, and therefore you have the toxicity signs. There are large number of other factors also which are responsible for nitrate poisoning, And one of the things which every vet should remember is that for plant to accumulate nitrate, from soil nitrogen, some amount of moisture in soil is necessary. And therefore, in situations where there is drought, total drought and no water, and you see cracks in the soil, that is not the period at which you will get nitrate poisoning. Then the nitrate poisoning would start happening after a long drought, and then there is a rain. Then you have immediate conversion of nitrogen into nitrate, accumulation of nitrate, and this nitrate will cause problems. Now these are different crops, weeds. Some crops also contain a lot of these toxic material like nitrates. Cabbages, turnips, sugar beets, lettuce, potatoes, carrots, tomato, especially mentioned here because there are some areas where these are fed to cattle, especially in goat. A lot of vegetable waste is being taken from the vegetable markets and fed to goat. So these are some of the material which will end up with problems. Then there are crops like millet, oat, soybean, sorghum, Sudan grass, sweet clover, wheat, as well as tomato is also, because there are sometimes tomato harvesting, or if there is a crop of tomato and the prices crashes, then people tend to feed tomato plant, or after harvesting of tomato the plant is fed. So these are some of the important sources of nitrate. Now as far as growth stage is concerned, young plant has more nitrate. Now, leaves and stem would have less nitrate than the lower part. It's generally said that the lower part, 6 inches, from the soil, is the one which is having the highest nitrate content. So, in situations where you harvest a crop, and after harvesting a crop, you leave it like that, and there is a rain. There is a rain, and after rain, you have some growth of the plant. That is the most period, and if at that point of time, usually instead of harvesting, what farmers would do is drive the cattle for grazing in that crop area, and that is where the nitrate poisoning would happen. So these are all acute cases of nitrate poisoning. But the second is chronic. In chronic, what happens? All these crops which are containing lots of nitrate kind of material you are feeding to cattle, but somehow the rumen health is not maintained because of not incorrect feeding of the feeding practices, less of water availability. All this results in damage to microflora, and microflora which otherwise should multiply for taking care of this nitrate would not happen, and then you would have what is called as chronic kind of nitrate poisoning. Cabbage is regarded as one of the important vegetable waste which is fed to cattle as well as goat as well as other animals. And about cabbage, there are three problems in cabbage. It's not only that it is very rich in nitrate, but it is also very rich in calcium and also rich in soluble carbohydrates. So large consumption of cabbage would result in a lot of these problems related with nitrate, calcium, and carbohydrate. There is one more problem with cabbage, and that is it also contains thyrotrophic, toxic substances, which will cause goiter. And I have seen lots of these cases, especially in goat, where lot of cabbage is fed. Even I find lot of cities, these buffalo farmers take cabbage, waste cabbages from the vegetable market, and they feed to even buffaloes and cows. Especially in goat, I have seen that nothing much happens to goat because they are able to manage with whatever cabbage is fed. But the fetus which develops, the embryo which develops is having severe goiter. So lots of cases where the kids are born with swelling in the thyroid related with goiter. Another problem with cabbage poisoning is presence of Heinz bodies, and these Heinz bodies are basically denatured hemoglobin, which will make the RBCs appear as foreign to the immune system, and they are cleared off by phagocytosis, and that's how hemolytic anemia, would happen. So in case of cabbage, basically there are two kinds of syndromes that have been reported. One syndrome is called as hemolytic syndrome, where there is hemolysis, anemia, and hemoglobinuria. And there is another one where, because of high level of calcium, the calcium absorption becomes passive. And you all must be knowing that if you give lots of calcium, it also causes syndrome which is similar to calcium deficiency. So therefore, one has to be very cautious when you are feeding calcium. And this is across the species. When you give optimum quantity of calcium in the diet, the calcium absorption is in active form. So net absorption of calcium is extremely good. Whereas if you give lots of calcium, then it becomes a passive absorption, and passive absorption leads to less of calcium absorption, and therefore osteoporosis because of mobilization of calcium. And therefore there are outbreaks that have been reported where lots of cabbage feeding results in weakness in the hind limb, especially after calving, and then animal is not able to get up, something like downwards cow syndrome. Now let's see how to detect nitrate in forages, because this, I think this is a very rampant problem, especially in Konkan area as well as in Marathwada and Vidarbha area. So there, I think we have to be very vigilant and do mapping of presence of nitrates in forages during different season. So there are quick tests that are available for detecting nitrate in forages, and these are all semi-quantitative method. So one of the very common tests that is done is called the diphenylamine test. So here you have to just put 3 drops of this reagent into cut stem, which is cut open. You just put few drops, and you can see the color which develops. So if blue color develops, then it is positive. And there is also a range given so that you can find out if it is within the threshold or beyond the threshold. This is how the blood will appear if it is nitrate poisoning. It's a bluish chocolate colored blood. Even the mucous membrane also becomes chocolate colored. There is rapid and difficult breathing because there is formation of methemoglobin, and this methemoglobin is not having optimum oxygen affinity. So oxygen carrying capacity of blood will be decreased. So there will be hypoxia, and all hypoxic kind of symptoms will be happening here. Usually pregnant animals who survive will also abort, and abortions generally occur approximately 10 to 14 days following exposure to nitrates. And that's why you have to take care of the pregnant animals if they have suffered from nitrate poisoning. Subclinical nitrate poisoning is also quite common, and it is known to reduce reproductive efficiency in adult cattle. It also lower weights gain with or without decreased feed intake in young stock. And research has shown that serum progesterone concentration may be decreased greatly in open animals, about 50%, and more moderately in early pregnancy. So this is the reason why in nitrate poisoning, you have problems related with fertility. So repeat breeding is very common. Services per conception would increase. So if this is a problem, then you need to check forages. And it's very easy to differentiate between a common source problem and an individual problem. Because if it is an individual cow related or buffalo related problem, because of hormone, because of ovaries, or because of some pathology in the reproductive tract, then you will have 1 or 2 animals that will be suffering. But if it is a common source, then you have a large number of problems. So I usually differentiate between by looking at how many animals in the village, or how many animals within the herd is suffering from a particular problem. If you have more numbers, then it is a common source. If it is a common source, you can look at what nitrate as one of the candidate. This is again another test which can be done, and basically this should be done by the vet to know how much is the methemoglobin level, because the methemoglobin level in the blood will determine how aggressively you will have to treat, how many repetitions or frequency of injections you will have to do. And then also the whether the treatment is giving any response or not, That also you can determine by doing. It's a very simple test. What you need to do is take a white filter paper, take 1 drop of blood. It should be an absorbent white, very clean paper. Put a drop of blood on it, and then once it is dried, immediately within 5 minutes you have to compare this with the chart. So what I have done, I have given this chart uh, on a portal called www.indiancattle.com. So any vet who would like to test the filter paper can go to the website, get this chart. There is also another continuous chart that has been given, which is based on the scanning of the color. So we have done scanning of different methemoglobin colors, and a continuous chart is there. So you can compare your filter paper with that chart and find out how much is the methemoglobin, and based on that you can carry out the treatment. We are also trying to come up with a app so that you can scan your instead of looking at visually, you can just scan with the app. You can scan the drop, and immediately it will tell you how much is the methemoglobin, and what kind of treatment and how much treatment is to be given. So that, I think, should also be available very soon. Now, treatment of nitrate poisoning, it's very straightforward. Uh, you have to give methylene blue injection. Methylene blue injection will result immediately in reduction of methemoglobin and oxidation to formation of normal hemoglobin. Now, methylene blue injection is available by a company called Prevan Blue. I think in Mumbai there is one company called Avalon Pharma, which is making this product available. So it is 1% injection, and 1 to 2 ml per kg body weight you have to give. Sometimes you have to repeat. Remember, in all poisoning and toxicity, you have two kinds of approaches to treatment. One is specific antidote, and another one is supportive. Both are extremely important, and many times I find that the supportive treatment is more important, which could be followed by specific antidotes or specific treatment. And about that, we would be seeing in next few slides. So in nitrate, methylene blue is the and supportive therapy like diuretics, because sometimes methemoglobin will also cause nephrosis. So give a lot of diuretics along with fluids to clear off all obnoxious materials, and removal of the source of the nitrate. Many times you have to replace the rumen microflora with the microflora from other healthy animal. I mean, many times if cattle or buffalo rumen flora is not available, I have done a lot of inoculum from goat microflora also. I mean, you can go to any butcher, get from a healthy buck the rumen content, and sieve it, and the fluid part can be fed to the animal, and because there is a lot of sharing of microflora between the two. You can also give B complex injections. Especially I prefer giving B complex orally here, for basic reason that I'm giving B complex to support the growth of rumen microflora. There is one more injection which is available by Intas. It's called Novizac. See, Novizac is the injection which has got sodium pyruvate, nucleotide, and buffered phosphorus. Now, how this is going to help in lots of poisoning cases, especially where there is Hens bodies, is because these Hens bodies are denatured hemoglobin that also occur in case of nitrate poisoning, and sometimes you have dual kind of poisoning where you have Hens bodies and you also have other kinds of pathologies. So this will lead to reversal of denatured hemoglobin because of reverse TCA cycle. That is, instead of utilizing glucose, it will be utilizing pyruvate from the other end, and then the denatured hemoglobin would be resolved. Otherwise, if you don't take care of methemoglobin, then what is going to happen is these Hens bodies will still remain in circulation, and even if you have treated cases of methemoglobin, but these RBCs which are recognized as foreign will still be cleared. So you will have continued hemolytic anemia. Then onion poisoning. Onion poisoning again is caused because of certain alkaloids called alkaloid propyl disulfide, and very similar kind of high sulfur containing amino acids or toxic material like alkalides. So rumen microflora can degrade these these alkalides if it is fed in within the threshold. Generally it is said that up to 25% of the feed, if you're including onion bulbs as well as onion plant, rumen is able to take care of this. Whereas if you go to 50% and 75%, then probably there are problems. There have been lots of cases of onion poisoning reported in literature. Uh, Generally, it is said that goat are quite resistant. Even sheep have also been found to be relatively resistant to onion poisoning. So they say that even to pregnant goat and pregnant sheep, you can give up to 75% onion can be replaced in the feed. So in those areas where there is onion farming, and if you find that a lot of onion material is available cheap, you can give it to sheep and goat. But in case of cattle, if you want to give, you can replace it to 25%, and up to that level, you will find that milk will not be having the smell of the onion. Otherwise, if you have large quantity in feed, then you are likely to get some smell onion like smell even in milk. Now the symptoms here are constant vocalization, weakness, and hemolytic anemia, Hens bodies. These are the Hens bodies which I was talking about, and these are all present in lots of diseases in cattle and buffaloes. For example, I have noticed these Hens bodies even in phosphorus deficiency hemoglobinuria. Then Breckenfen poisoning, all Brassica family like cabbage, etc., would also lead to formation of these, and this is probably because of very high calcium level, which leads to low phosphorus, and because of low phosphorus you have glucose uptake which is less, and because of that you have accumulation of these Hens bodies. So that's why I have said that we treat it with Novizac, so that there is a inverse TCA cycle is stimulated, and then there is ATP formation, and because of that this Hens bodies will be resolved. Now I'll give you a brief idea of what is the general approach to treatment of poisoning. So as I have said, supportive therapy is very important. So intravenous dextrose. Now in case of poisoning, if you want to give intravenous dextrose, always give 50% or 25%, because here you will also be giving some kind of energy which is required, because there would be hypoglycemia because of toxic material which is also affected. Then you can also give IV fluid to maintain hydration and induce diuresis. Now, whenever you are giving IV fluid for dehydration, always remember that you want tissue perfusion. You don't want to load lot of you don't want to load the circulation because of rapid intravenous infusion. I know it is very difficult, because when you are out there in the field, you have to hold the animal, and then you can't afford to spend 2 hours or 3 hours. But if you really want good tissue perfusion, and if you want that your fluid should help the animal and not only cause diuresis, then giving it very slow is extremely important. Then there are people who also give Ringer's lactate, but always are not able to differentiate when to give 5% dextrose or sodium chloride injection or Ringer's lactate. So for there is one quick rule which I generally follow, and that is, if there is systemic acidosis, I would generally prefer Ringer's lactate followed by some other IV fluid which is isotonic. Now how do I diagnose systemic acidosis? By just looking at the breathing. If breathing is very rapid and shallow, and there are other signs suggesting that there could be systemic acidosis, I would usually start with Ringer's lactate, because Ringer's lactate would also bring down because it contains lactate, and lactate will be converted into bicarbonate, and that's how the systemic acidosis will also be taken care of. Another thing to remember here is that whatever injection you are going to give, you are giving in vein. And from vein, it has to come back into circulation. And for coming back into circulation, you need good, peripheral circulation. If there is no good peripheral circulation, the venous return is going to be less. And therefore, you have to be very careful to ensure that peripheral circulation has resumed. And the test which I usually do is, I just touch the extremities of the animal. If extremities are very cold, and if I am not able to get good pulse in the extremity, then I will assume that the peripheral circulation is compromised, and there I would like to see that the peripheral circulation is improved. And one of the measures which you can take is, you can give norepinephrine or noradrenaline, which is available in the market. That can be given as a very slow injections over, say, about half an hour. You can give it either with your syringe very slowly, so that you maintain per minute perfusion. Keep an eye on her heart rate, and then also keep on checking whether the extremities have started warming up. Then for taking care of acidosis, you also sometimes need to give sodium bicarbonate injection. Now, sodium bicarbonate injection is available 8.4%, and the dose is 2.5 to 3.5 ml. Never mix sodium bicarbonate with calcium injection. There are also people I have seen who would like to jump and give calcium. I don't know for what reason, and they feel that if there is peripheral hypothermia, and if heart rate is less, they usually think it is because of hypocalcemia and jump at giving calcium injection. And sometimes they would mix sodium bicarbonate with calcium to avoid that, because there will be physical interaction. Then some oral adsorbents can also be given, like activated carbon or activated charcoal, which will adsorb. Remember, again, there is a difference between adsorption and between binding. So lots of material that is available out in the market is activated carbon, but they only adsorb, and it's really not known whether remains intact till the material is out in the feces. So therefore, there are now new materials that are coming up in the market, which are called as aminated, activated carbon, like ACED or ACETA. These are all amine. So these are all very ionic kind of activated carbon, and they will covalently bind, especially the mycotoxins. Like alpha. You have all those mycotoxins from Aspergillus and other fungus. So they will bind, and that is a irreversible binding. So you will not have problems of re-release of the mycotoxins or these kind of toxins. Then I'll give you some idea about general antidotes, like atropine sulfate. We all know is an antidote for organophosphates and carbamate poisoning. Please remember, only these two insecticide and pesticides are the one which will require atropine. Otherwise, don't think atropine sulfate is a general antidote for all poisonings. Atropine sulfate injection will also have its own side effects, especially if it is not required. Then there will be atropinization, and lot of other sides will also happen. There is also another product available in the market which is a replacement of atropine sulfate, and it has same effect of atropine sulfate, but it does not have the the side effects or the other kind of unwanted now this can also be given. So this will also take care of similar action like atropine sulfate. Then another antidote is dimercaprol. Now dimercaprol is and a good old our friend British anti-lewisite in a ball. We have been taught about this in colleges in toxicology. So this is also available in the market and can be given. Then there are also chelating materials like calcium EDTA, which can also be given. And sometimes if there is specific poisoning where you feel that there is hypocalcemia, you can also give calcium borugluconate, but always give it separately. And whenever calcium borugluconate I would never give entire calcium borugluconate IV, because if I give ionic calcium, most of it will be excreted in urine. So I would always give half intravenous to trigger mobilization of calcium, and half I would give subcut, so that there is a constant release of calcium. Then there is also supportive therapy like corticosteroids. I generally don't use corticosteroids in case of poisoning because of its lots of side effects, unless and until I'm very sure that corticosteroid is going to help. I do use diuretic like furosemide to to induce diuresis, so that I get clearance. Again, while using furosemide, please see that there is no hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia. So you have to be very careful. Otherwise, I see people loading with Lasix injection twice a day, thrice a day. Doses are given for a very long period of time. It may have problems. Another thing to remember with furosemide is never use gentamicin, amikacin, and streptomycin. So whenever you are giving these antibiotics, never use furosemide because it will increase, renal toxicity. Then sometimes there are, convulsions in poisoning. So you need to also take care of convulsions. So for that, you can give diazepam or midazolam. So I prefer usually because it has got less side effects than diazepam, uh, although it is short term. But then it is I usually follow it by giving a phenytoin injection, because then phenytoin will take care of the new convulsion bursts that are going to come up. So this is how you can take care of seizures. Now we come to hydrocyanic acid poisoning. SCN poisoning, chronic would cause hypothyroidism, whereas acute would cause respiratory distress. So I'll not dwell into details because the basic things you all know. These are some of the plants which are rich in hydrocyanic acid. Again, SCN poisoning is more common in young plants. So young growing plants will accumulate a lot of hydrocyanic acid, and if it is consumed in large quantities, then there is poisoning. But if it is consumed in less quantities, and if microflora is not able to manage this SCN glycosides, then in that case you have chronic poisoning. Now, detecting cyanide in plants. Again, this is an old, picric acid test, which we have been taught. But there is also one more test that has come in, that has been claimed to be much superior than picric acid, and it's called as a Figel-Angel paper method. Now, in this, it is the same, kind of picric acid kind of test only, where you have to put a drop of the material on, or generally what is done is, as I have shown you in the test tube, you can take the plant material which is suspected of having SCN, and then just put your paper along with the cork, and then wait for some time, and then if there is hydrocyanic acid, then this paper will be showing a different chocolate color, and that will tell you whether there is an SCN poisoning. So about SCN, again I'll not go into details, because you all know that this is very easy to diagnose, because there is what is called as a cherry red blood, and then you have a lot of dyspnea, excitement, sometimes even convulsions. Many times there is confusion between cyanide poisoning and nitrate poisoning, because symptoms are more or less same. And therefore you have to look at the blood which is drawn. So if you look at the blood which is drawn, in case of nitrate poisoning, as I have already said, the blood is cherry colored, whereas in case of SCN poisoning, once you take out the blood and once it is exposed to air for some time, it becomes cherry red exposure. So that is the differentiating feature which you can quickly do at the field. Chronic cyanide poisoning will cause goiter. It will also cause cystitis, ataxia, as well as abortions are common. Then repeat breeding is also common, and there is a lot of now literature available on cyanide poisoning, especially chronic cyanide poisoning, because of plant material as well as because of environmental contamination. And I think all the vets should consider, especially those vets who are working in industrial area, they should also be aware as to what kind of pollutants and what kind of factories are there. Could there be any accident where there would be release of such obnoxious material, and what is going to be their effect on animals? And you should be ready with the kit, treatment kit, because at the last moment you just cannot go around running and trying to get the drugs for treatment. So you got to have in every dispensary a kit where depending upon the kinds of poisons that are you are likely to get in that area, all the antidotes and supportive material is available at hand, because you have to act immediately once the cases start coming to you. Now, treatment of hydrocyanic acid poisoning, there is one one more inhaler that is available is called as an amyl nitrite. This amyl nitrite, can be pushed as an inhalant, and it acts very quickly. So that is what usually they do in humans, especially in children. As soon as as soon as they get large number of people getting affected and coming to the hospital, they would start giving amyl nitrate as inhalation to take care of immediately, because this is absorbed immediately, and then the SCN effects will be starting reducing. Then sodium nitrite is another injection along with sodium thiosulfate. So this is what we have been taught in the colleges, that this is the antidote. But now we know that both sodium nitrite as well as sodium thiosulfate also has lot of other effects, like it also causes uh, especially sodium nitrate uh, has been found to cause hypotension. uh, Another problem is sodium nitrate also act very slowly, and after injection usually they say that it takes about 30 minutes to 35 minutes for the release of hydrocyanic from the hemoglobin, and oxyhemoglobin to be formed, and you can't wait for that long period of time. So there is another compound that is available in the market, which is commonly used in case of human, and that is called 4-dimethyl aminophenol. So these are all aminophenol. It's also called as a DMAP, and this is used at the dose rate of 3.25 milligram. The advantage of this particular compound is that you get 30% methemoglobin within 10 minutes. So all cyanoglobin, will be converted to methemoglobin, immediately in 30 minutes, and then you can follow it up by, giving sodium nitrite as well as, sodium thiosulfate to take care of, methemoglobin. Another compound that is available is called hydroxylamine, which is again used in case of cyanide poisoning. And in case of human nowadays, they're using sodium nitrite plus DMAP or sodium nitrite plus HA combinedly. So this will bring down the dose of sodium nitrite. So the problem of hypotension, will be reduced. And then you can also have, quick conversion into methemoglobin and then oxyhemoglobin. And then thiosulfate, can be given 100 to 500 gram orally also. If you find that, there is still cyanide, containing glycosides in rumen, so you can give this orally. So orally it will bind to the glycosides and decrease. Now chlorpromazine is known to be significantly potentiate the efficacy of sodium nitrate and sodium thiosulfate. So suppose if those other compounds which I have mentioned are not available to you, you can use sodium nitrate and sodium thiosulfate, but also use largactil along with, so that the conversion of conversion to methemoglobin will be much faster. Diltiazem, naloxone, these are all the drugs which you can use, for bringing the respiration to normal, because in this case there is a lot of respiratory distress. Another antidote which is also very commonly used in human, and then it should also be tried in animals, is hydroxocobalamin. This is vitamin B12A, not vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is different. This is a precursor of vitamin B12. Now injections of this particular provitamin B12 is also available in market, and what it does, it binds to cyanide ion and gets converted into vitamin B12. So you are injecting a precursor and getting it converted to vitamin B12, which is useful to the animal. Similarly, there are chelators like cobalt editate, that is also available as antidote for SCN poisoning. Oxalate poisoning, again, it's very common in case of animals, and this poisoning occurs again both due to high oxalate content. So there are two sides to oxalate poisoning. One is, you have forages and plant material which are rich in oxalate because of certain soil factors and because of weather factors, and the cropping pattern in which you follow. And the second is contamination of the forages and fodder, especially straws, with mycotoxins. And a lot of these mycotoxins like aspergillus would have oxalate content, and therefore the oxalate toxicity can occur indirectly because of this fungus contamination. Rice straw is one of the important factor causing oxalate, because the oxalate content of rice straw is very high. And number two, especially those friends who are from Konkan region, they should listen to this, that rice straw is very common over there. And if rice straw gets contaminated with with rains, moisture, and if there is unseasonal rains, and then rice straw becomes wet, then you find these mycotoxins growth very luxuriantly. And these mycotoxins, which are black in color like in a powder, they are the one which contains a lot of oxalate, and then oxalate poisoning would happen. I still remember lots of cases I have seen in Konkan region, and I'm still not convinced that the cases which usually is regarded as enterotoxemia or botulism are because of those. I still suspect those to be oxalate poisoning, because if you give treatment with calcium, you will find there is there is good recovery. Napier Bajra hybrid, this again, I would like to emphasize, this particular fodder here, because this is becoming very common. There are a lot of hybrid Napiers which are coming up in the market, and there are multi-cut varieties. Now, all these varieties, which are derived from Bajra, are very high in oxalate, as high as around 4%. And this oxalate content becomes high after first cut. So, after first cut, the second cut, would have higher oxalate, third cut would have still higher oxalate. And if you are not following the age of harvesting properly, if you are aging it, if you are not harvesting the second cut, third cut, and fourth cut at the right time, and if you are delaying the harvest, then you are likely to have more of oxalate. Secondly, if you are feeding it as it is, then animals are likely to have oxalate poisoning. But if you are converting this into silage, then the oxalate effect will be reduced. So these are some of the common plants which are known to be rich in oxalate content. So again, oxalate by itself, rumen has got a lot of capacity to metabolize oxalate. So normally oxalate will not be, you should not have any problem if you're feeding oxalate. It becomes a problem only in two situations. One, where you have started suddenly feeding lots of oxalate without giving microflora to adjust to the new feed. And number two, where your microflora is damaged, and then you are not having the growth of the right kind of bacteria which will take care of this oxalate. So in both the cases, we will have problem. Now, oxalate toxicity, again, signs are again acute. Acute toxicity signs are just exactly like hypocalcemia. You see, tremors. Then you have excitement. Then animals is showing tetanic signs. Sit down, lateral recumbency, sternal recumbency. So very classical. And I have seen cases with oxalate poisoning where calcium level goes down to 4 milligram per deciliter, 3 milligram per deciliter. And one of the tests which I usually do for oxalate poisoning in field is coagulation test. So I just take out blood in a while and watch it for coagulation. If it doesn't coagulate by 12 minutes, then I would think that there is a problem related with calcium. And if you want to really confirm it, just put 1 drop of calberol or myphase which you are having, and if it immediately coagulates, then you know that it's a problem related with calcium, and you can with oxalate, and you can give calcium to take care of that. About this Napier hybrid, the point to emphasize here is ages plants have more oxalate, and therefore if you are having multi-cut varieties, please be sure, and at least for once, all these new varieties that have come up with hybrid Napier, you should check for oxalate contents at various cuts, and then find out the right age at which these hybrid Napiers are to be cut and fed to the animals. Treatment here is again calcium borogluconate, but problem with calcium borogluconate is you are giving calcium borogluconate just to temporarily take care of serum calcium, but most of the calcium will be excreted. So you will have to depend on dicatonic calcium to be given. Dicatonic calcium can be given intramuscular, and it is released slowly, and its assimilation absorption is higher. You can also give oral calcium, and as I have said, calcium borogluconate, if you want to give half IV and give half subcutaneously to maintain absorption for a longer period of time. Then another thing is thiamine is also known to be effective in case of oxalate poisoning. Magnesium sulfate orally you can give, so that you can get rid of the oxalate. Oxalate also binds to calcium and magnesium. So if there is any residual oxalate in rumen, it will bind to magnesium and calcium which you are giving orally. Then enough of hydration so that the oxalate crystals which you are likely to have in kidneys, and as well as oxalic acid in blood circulation, that you will be taking care of, and replace rumen microflora, as I have said earlier. Lastly, I will just touch upon lead poisoning in brief. This is not a very common, but sometimes you do get in stray cows that the cow was roaming around, and then it leaked some batteries, leaked grease or machinery, some kind of material which is rich in lead, and then immediately it starts showing certain signs. Especially people use paint, and then if this paint is discarded, the tins of the paints are discarded. Especially those leaded paints would have very high lead content, and would be the cause of poisoning. So these are the clinical signs. Most the clinical signs are very, very diagnostic. I usually look at whether animal is able to see. There is a kind of blindness. The pupil is open. The animal's eyes appear to be wide open, but it's not able to see. There is depression, and then there is diarrhea which is blackish in color, and animal will start occasionally with abdominal contractions, will try to pass feces which is black in color. Then you have muscle tremors and convergence. Now as far as treatment is concerned for lead poisoning, antidote is dimercaprol, that is the BAL. You have to give 4 milligram per kg body weight. Now BAL treatment in case of lead poisoning, a prolonged kind of treatment, because you have lead which is deposited in different tissues. So you would like to get rid of the lead which is deposited, otherwise you will have recurrence if you are not giving repeatedly. So usually the line of action here is you give 4 milligram per kg body weight, you repeat every 4 to 6 hours first day. Second day, you can repeat at around 8 to 12 hours, and third day again, at least once in a day. So this you should carry out for at least 5 to 7 days. Then you will be able to get rid of the lead which is accumulated. Then drenching of small amounts of magnesium sulfate is again helpful, because magnesium will also bind to the lead, and it will also cause laxation. So the lead which is accumulated in the rumen gastrointestinal tract would be released. Then editate calcium disodium is another chelating agent which is used in lead poisoning, even in human. And this can be given deep intramuscular. So this will replace lead, will release lead for excretion from its reservoirs. So this is all I wanted to talk to you about different poisonings in case of ruminant. What I have done is also I have created a corner in www.indiancattle.com, which is a poisoning helpline. So there we will be having a reservoir, or can say inventory of all the material which is required for accessing by the vets. So if you want a quick access to find out what could be the poison, what is the diagnosis, what kind of diagnosis you want to compare with the standard chart, you want to find out what are the drugs which are available, where it is available, the phone numbers and other things, all those things will be available at this site. This is a charitable site. It's a non-profitable venture by Bombay Gorakshak Trust, and you are most welcome to visit this site and get more information about poisonings and toxins in ruminants. With this, I again thank all the participants for patiently listening to me, and I hope I have been able to add into your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Samad sir, for your nice presentation and really great information, and hope that will help all the veterinarians, those are working in the field.
Sir, we are having some questions here.
Sure.
Sir, we are having some questions from participants, sir.
Sure.
Yes. So I have some. Yes,
Yes,
Dr.
yes.
Upendra Gaikwad, you have noted the question, so you can go ahead. You can ask.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yes. Sir, there is a Dr. Rajendra Gujarati. He asks that can we give diuretics in onion poisoning?
In onion,
Hello?
in onion
Onion
poisoning,
poisoning. Yes, sir.
you see, in as I have said, I'll go back to. Okay, in case of onion poisoning, there is hemoglobinuria. So if you find that there is hemoglobinuria because of hemolytic anemia. Now, in this, what will happen? Hemoglobin, will be clogging the glomeruli because it is hemolytic anemia, and therefore here you can give diuretic along with lots of fluids, because here you want to have diuresis to clear off the nephrons. So yes, you can give diuretic along with lots of fluids, isotonic fluid.
Yes. Sir, again, one more question is there from Akash Jadhav.
Hmm.
Sir, he says that he has seen many vets use antibiotics and steroids in poisoning cases.
Hmm.
Is that necessary?
Uh, I don't think no use of antibiotic is necessary, because you are not having any infection. But if you feel that there is chronic toxicity, and because of chronic toxicity there is some kind of secondary infection, then you might think of antibiotic, but I wouldn't include that in my standard protocol. Number two, as I have already said, corticosteroid, I am always very careful in using corticosteroids, and I generally give corticosteroid only when it is extremely necessary, and I generally don't use it in case of poisonings. Rather than that, I would prefer giving 25% or 50% dextrose, because a lot of these antidotes which we give get potentiated in presence of glucose. And if that is so, you must give 25% and 50% glucose first, and then give those antidotes.
Sir. Sir, again, there is one question. May I take it?
Sure.
Yeah, sir, there is a Krishnamurti Subramanyam.
Mhm.
Sugarcane tops feeding regarding to oxalate poisoning.
Okay. Yeah, my again same sugarcane tops. I've got two problems. One is it's very rich in saponin, and number two, it is also rich in oxalate. Now, if you're feeding sugarcane tops, uh, in that case, you have to introduce sugarcane tops slowly in the feed. Don't start feeding it at once. So both
Sir.
human is able to take care of saponin. It is also able to take care of oxalate. Whenever you are using sugarcane tops, you should double dose of calcium, because this calcium will be bound to
Sir.
both saponin as well as oxalates. So net availability of calcium will be less. So you have to be very careful that in all those areas where there are sugar factories and people are feeding sugarcane tops, then you can calcium double the quantity. There are people who are also converting sugarcane tops into silage. So there is no harm in feeding sugarcane top, but it should be fed very carefully, and you should take into consideration the calcium homeostasis in this case.
Sir. Sir, there is Dr. Rajendra Gujarati. He says that he has seen edematous swelling at thigh and perineum region in oxalate poisoning. Is it true?
In chronic poisoning cases, you do get this, and mostly it is because of the calculi. It is because
Sir.
of oxalate crystals that are formed, and usually we see this more common in male, because of deposition of fine dust of calcium oxalate. This we have also seen very common in Marathwada area, especially
Yeah.
bullocks, where you get this premium. So usually it is because of the oxalate. So you have to you have to take care of the oxalate content of the feed, especially because in case of bullocks we generally don't supplement mineral mixture. So those poor guys are always dependent on whatever they are getting out in the field as fodder. So in those cases, we must give some calcium orally, at least dicalcium phosphate can be supplemented.
Sir, there is Sania Tabassum.
Hmm.
She asks, how much activated charcoal should be given, and is there any side effects giving calcium borogluconate via subcutaneous route?
Uh, as far as activated charcoal is concerned, there is no set dose which is given for and for in case of animals. So whenever I usually give around 100 gram to 150 gram of activated charcoal. But there is one side effect and problem of activated carbon or activated charcoal. That is, if the bowel evacuation, if it is not proper, then it starts getting accumulated, and then there is a severe constipation. So that is one problem which you have to take care. So I usually start giving less of activated carbon initially, but if I find that there is good defecation, animal is passing feces, so there is no harm, because activated carbon will not be absorbed. So that way it is not obnoxious. Now to her second question about calcium magnesium borogluconate, I usually find more problems giving IV calcium very rapidly because of cardiac fibrillation. So that is always because then the vets are very on fast route, they want to give very fast because they want to go and attend to another case. So there is fibrillation. So but as far as subcut is concerned, if you are using a clean needle, and if you are disinfecting the skin area properly, then I don't think this calcium borogluconate will have any problem. But don't give lot of calcium borogluconate one side. If you want to give half of the calcium borogluconate subcutaneously, I usually divide to 4 sides, 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side, and divided doses I give subcut. I don't see any. I have never seen problem with this.